The word get is the fifth most common verb in spoken English, after the verbs to be, to have, to go, and to do. The Oxford English Dictionary lists 102 meanings of get. That's daunting to somebody learning English. But fortunately, most of those meanings fall into three main categories, as I'll show you shortly. Before all that, we're going to look at the history of the word get that stretches back over 4,000 years. It's fascinating stuff if you're a word nerd, as I am. Anyway, we've only got about 15 minutes, so let's get it on. We'll start with the history. When we look at the origin of English words, we get lots of words from French, around 40%, another 15% directly from Latin, then there are quite a lot of Greek words, and about 30% of English vocabulary is Germanic. Most of that comes from Anglo-Saxon, but this 5% is from Old Norse, the language of the Vikings, a Scandinavian language. It's a much smaller percentage, but they gave us some of the most common words in the English language, including the pronoun they, and are, and window, and want, and give, and get. Yes, that's right. Every time you say get, you're using a term that stretches all the way back to those seafaring Danes with the horned helmets who first reached England in the 8th century AD. What's that? They didn't wear horned helmets? Okay, but the rest is true. In modern English, get is the only verb that is conjugated differently in British and American English. In British English, it's get, got, while in American English, it's get, got, gotten, where a British person would say, I've just got rid of my pet iguana. An American would say, I've just gotten rid of my pet iguana. It's true that some verb forms are more common in British than American English, or vice versa. For example, spoiled, spoilt, spelled, spelt, learned, learnt, but both forms are correct wherever you are. I'm British and I usually say learnt, but I might sometimes say learned. I guess it depends on what I had for breakfast that day. But I don't say gotten, except in the expression ill-gotten gains, which means things that you've obtained illegally. After robbing the bank, I spent my ill-gotten gains on a new pet iguana. Anyway, returning to get, let's start from the very beginning. If we look at the family tree of English, French, German, Latin, Greek, as well as Russian and Hindi and Persian, they all share a common ancestor. It's known as Proto-Indo-European. It originated around modern Ukraine. There are no written records of Proto-Indo-European, but the language has been reconstructed. How it was reconstructed is something that we'll explore another time. However, what we do know is that it was spoken around 4,500 years ago, and that its speakers had a word ged, meaning to seize, to take, or to grasp. Over time, the meaning of ged extended from literal to figurative grasping. On the Latin branch of the language family, it evolved into words as diverse as comprehend. Can you see it in that hend part, where you grasp the meaning? Apprehend, to seize someone. Entrepreneur, someone who seizes an opportunity. Words that reached English through French often underwent a sound change. In Old English, surprendre, from the Latin super and prendere, to overtake or to seize, gave us surprise, and other English words like prize, prison, and seize itself all descend from this same Indo-European root, ged. Let's return to the Germanic branch. In Norwegian, they have this word,
gjette, gjette,
which means to guess or to herd. In Dutch, they have
krijgen,
which means get. The gen part cognates with our get. In Old Norse, the verb was geta, which meant either to get or to guess. So what do you think this means? Geta rätt. If you said guess right, then you guessed right. and you can read a bit of Old Norse. Well done. And remember that in England at that time, and we're talking around the 8th to the 11th century, there was another Germanic language spoken in England, and that was Anglo-Saxon, also known as Old English. Old English and Old Norse were similar but different languages. I guess a modern day equivalent would be Spanish and Italian. Old English also had the verb getan, meaning to get. However, in Old English, it was almost exclusively used in compounds. So the word forget, forgotten, we get from Old English, not from Old Norse. Getan also evolved into the word yet. It also gave us the word beget. This too is from the Old English branch. If you don't know beget, it literally means to be the father of something. Here's a biblical example. Thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. So one Indo-European root word begot all these words and more, albeit through different linguistic paths. And that's just in English. So how did get into modern English? Well, as you'll know from your history, the Normans invaded England in 1066, and for the next 300 years the ruling classes spoke French, or rather Norman French. And because all the documents and administration of that time was carried out either in French or in Latin, and because the peasant classes couldn't read or write, English almost ceased to exist as a written language. So the trail of get kind of runs cold in English until around 1200, when it appears in English in the Ormulum, a biblical work written by a monk called Orm. After that date, it turns up regularly in English texts. It was used by Wycliffe in his Bible of 1391 41 times, and in the works of Shakespeare more than 300 times. Interestingly, Shakespeare uses gotten, such as this quote from Henry VI, Part 2. Come on, brave soldiers, doubt not of the day, and that once gotten, doubt not of large pay. So the American gotten is an older English form. So now we know where get comes from, let's look at how we use it. Now, I've been an English teacher for many years, and one of the most, if not the most common question I get is, how do you use get? I said earlier that the OED lists 112 meanings of get, but it's not quite as bad as it seems, because most uses of get fall into 3 categories. I'll come to that in a moment, but first, before we look at that, it's important to know why we use get. There are 2 main reasons. One is for informality. Get is much more common in spoken English than in written English. You want to keep your spoken English friendly and snappy. That's why we say I got up at 8 and not I rose at 8. That's why we say I got an email from Neela and not I received an email from her. The other reason is brevity. As well as being informal, get has only 1 syllable. Try saying I understand 3 times and you'll see what I mean. Oh, I understand it. I understand it. I understand it. That makes so much more sense now. Okay, I got it. That makes so much more sense now. Better, isn't it? So these are the 3 main ways we use get. I'll come to other meanings afterwards. The first meaning is to obtain something or receive something or buy something or fetch something. They all fit into the same category, so that a thing ends up in somebody's possession. So for example, I got a message from Bob, so that's receive. I got a new snowboard, so that could mean bought or received. So of course, if it's ambiguous, you may wish to specify that you bought it or you received it. There's no obligation to use got here. Could you get my snowboard? I left it in the chalet. So that means fetch, so go and bring it back. When we say have got something, it's also about things you've obtained. I've just got a new job. I get it, meaning I understand, also falls into this category because the understanding is now in your possession, if you see what I mean. Side note here, when we use have got to talk about ownership, it's another way of saying I have something. So you can say I have a pen or I've got a pen. It's exactly the same. I have grey hair. By the way, you cannot in these situations say I've gotten grey hair. No, when it's about ownership, it's always I've got. For the second meaning, all we do is substitute the word become plus adjective for get plus adjective. If you don't eat for a long time, you become hungry. Well, not many people would say it like that. You can, but it's far more idiomatic to say I get hungry when I don't eat. Likewise, if you don't sleep, you get tired. If the Wi-Fi connection in your Airbnb is slow, then you get angry. If you watch too many TikTok videos, you get detached from reality. If you subscribe to Let Them Talk TV, you get wise. We can also include in this section the way get is used to replace a reflexive verb. Expressing it in this way is more informal. So, for example, we say I got dressed instead of I dressed myself. I got ready instead of I prepared myself. I got hurt instead of I hurt myself. In many other languages, these phrases would be expressed with reflexive verbs, and that's perfectly fine in English, but again, get often sounds more idiomatic. The third way to use get is to say that something has changed position. This requires get followed by a preposition, or rather an adverb particle. So if you get up, you've changed position, whereas if you wake up, you haven't. If you get on the bus, you're changing your position from outside to inside. To get away means to leave or escape. To get out means to leave a place. But many of these phrases can be used figuratively. For example, we got over a lot of setbacks before the project was successful. Here you're not literally moving, but you're in a different position, figuratively, from when you started. Included in this third meaning is when get means arriving at a destination. For example, what time will you get home? So you're changing position from where you are now to a new destination. If we take the next train, we'll get to London by 6 o'clock. In addition, you also have some idiomatic phrases which don't quite fit into these three main categories, or maybe they do, or maybe they don't. Anyway, I'll give you just a few here. So if you get away with something, you did something wrong but didn't get punished. For example, the politician committed many crimes but he still won the election. He got away with it. If you say get a move on, it just means hurry up. If you say something gets out of hand, it means it becomes unmanageable. So, for example, I expected 10 people to come to the meeting, but when 500 people showed up, things got out of hand. And of course, there are many more idiomatic uses of get. If you're learning English, then you just have to learn them as you would any piece of vocabulary. So get is an extremely versatile word with an interesting history. It's complicated, but as you can see, there are rules, there are neat categories. So just learn it that way if you're learner of English. And if you're interested in the history of the English language, then do sign up to my newsletter, link in the description, or become a Patreon, wisdom guaranteed. That's all for now. Have a beautiful day. Bye.